Fantastic. We'll get started in just a moment.
Hi, everybody. Are we ready, ladies?
Yes.
All right. Well, we'd like to welcome everyone tonight to the live table talk and book reveal for Overcoming Barriers for Women of Color in STEM. We are so excited about tonight's conversation. We know it's going to be engaging and just an opportunity for us to share some stories, for you to ask some questions, and just really just let our hair down and just get comfortable in conversation this evening. So, but before we get started, let me go over a few housekeeping rules. If you notice, you are completely muted and we cannot see your faces. And that's quite all right. So we have a moderator that will manage your questions. Please put them in the Q&A section of your Zoom, and we will address them as they come across. If we run out of time, there is a way that you can get in touch with us, and that's going to be on the last slide, because we want to make sure that we answer all your questions in the time that we have. Also, be reminded that no one else will be able to see your questions, so that way you can ask any question that you feel is appropriate, and we will do our best to answer it without sharing your personal information. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for this evening, and she will introduce the panelists, and then we'll just move forward from there. So our moderator tonight is Dr. Brandy Villa. Brandy hails from Georgia State University as a lecturer and an evaluator, and she also has her own business. So she's the lovely entrepreneur for Belay Consulting. Also, Brandy's in medical school, so she wears a lot of hats. So she's really just going to take a break from her life as a medical student and an evaluator, and she's going to moderate this beautiful conversation tonight. So that being said, Brandy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And I am so excited to be here with you guys and help hold some space for these dynamic, brilliant women who have so much wisdom and experience to share with you all. So let me tell you who is going to be speaking with us this evening. And then the way it's structured is we'll kind of go through one by one. And I will give each of them the chance to kind of tell you a little bit about how they came to write their chapter in this book. And then we will have some questions, hopefully from our attendees. And we've had some email questions, and everybody will get the chance to kind of know this wonderful panel of women a little bit better. So I'm going to go in the order in which I will speak to each of the women, but I just want to tell you who is here with us, who contributed to this volume. We will start with Sabrina Collins, who is the Executive Director of the Marburg STEM Center at Lawrence Technological University. We also have with us here today Angela White, who is the Assistant Dean of Student Success in the College of Science and Technology at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. We have Tyresa Jackson, a graduate student at the Teachers College of Columbia University. We have Pamela Leggett-Robinson, the Executive Director of PLR Consulting. We have Shireen Obear, the Dean of the Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering, which is a collaborative effort between the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. We have Nicole Powell, who's the Associate Professor of Chemistry at Oxford College of Emory University. We have Pamela Scott Johnson, who is the Dean of College of Natural and Social Sciences at California State University in Los Angeles. And last but not least, we have Christine Grant, who is the Associate Dean in the College of Engineering and Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at North Carolina State University. So as you can see, we have a really wide array of experience and expertise, and I think you guys are really going to be impressed when you hear their personal stories. So we will start with Sabrina, who wrote the foreword to the book. And I'm going to do something a little strange, Sabrina, and I'm going to read you the foreword that you wrote. And I'm going to ask you to respond to it in just a minute. So let me read this to you guys and share this, this story with our audience here tonight. Sabrina writes, I was absolutely devastated and humiliated. It was March 2014, and my department chair walked into my office and handed me an envelope, which essentially sealed my fate as an assistant chemistry professor at a small liberal arts institution in the Midwest. After I opened the envelope, I quickly glanced over the document, which indicated that I was denied tenure. That particular spring day is essentially a blur now, but I do remember texting my personal board of directors about the tenure denial decision. My board of directors is a network of amazing women in STEM who hold me accountable and tell me the truth when I need to hear it. I also emailed my colleagues outside of my department who had been very supportive of me. I was actually in shock about the decision, but thankful that I had a 2-week spring break to try to get my emotions under control and figure out just what the hell I was going to do next in my career. I had no intentions of appealing the decision either. For what? Be denied again? Tenure denial was an enormous barrier for me to personally overcome, but I did it. How did I navigate the STEM landscape? I was able to move forward because I am surrounded by a network of amazing women and men in both industry and academia who encouraged me to keep going after this awful career setback. The women celebrated in overcoming barriers for women of color in STEM, emerging research and opportunities, have faced tremendous challenges in STEM, but they persisted. Powerful narratives and overcoming barriers explore diverse topics, including the significance of historically Black colleges and universities, and the relationship between racial identity, and science self-efficacy of African American students attending these institutions, the importance of networking, collaborating, and scholarship and research, effective mentoring in STEM, examination of diversity and inclusion initiatives, and the STEM professoriate, and discovering your own strength and resilience along your STEM journey. More importantly, this book is a valuable resource for women of color to navigate their own STEM journeys. I absolutely applaud these women for sharing their STEM testimony and storytelling, which will provide tools and tips for other women facing their own challenges. Overcoming career barriers is certainly a difficult process for anyone. However, the women celebrated in this important book provide a STEM career roadmap to help you walk in your purpose. Sabrina, this is so powerful and really touches on so many themes that became common throughout each of these authors' stories. And what's interesting, and something that I absolutely noted that I have to point out, is though each of these women intentionally contributed to this book that wanted to bring together these stories, these themes that you mentioned in your foreword, they didn't come out of an intentional concerted effort on the front end. We didn't all get together and discuss what we should talk about, and yet these threads are so prevalent for so many of the women and their stories here tonight. Please tell me how you came to write this forward and touch on so many of these important themes for us.
Well, Brandy, thank you so much for that wonderful reading of the forward, and good evening, everyone. So there are about 3 things that I want to share as I wrote the forward. And you know, the very first thing is that I firmly believe that we all have a responsibility to share a part of our testimony to help somebody else. And you don't have to tell your entire business. You don't have to tell all of your business to help somebody. And so, so that's one of the key things that I wanted to share, because initially I was reluctant to, you know, to share my journey, but I knew it could help someone else going through a difficult career challenge or a career setback. So that's the first thing. But the second thing that I really wanted to do is take the shame out of tenure denial. You know, so it, as difficult as the experience was, so it was incredibly painful, hurtful, embarrassing. The thing is, I didn't want that to define my career. You know, it's one thing that happened to me, and I was able to move forward. But I was able to move forward, and so this is the third point, because I have a very supportive group of women, amazing women in STEM, who I refer to as my personal board of directors. And if you don't have a BOD, you should get your own. But basically, these women, they are in chemistry, chemical engineering, started their own companies, working on beauty products, the tech industry, doing inclusion work. And the thing is, if you're going through something difficult, you need to have a supportive network. So I had the BOD and my family, you know, to kind of help me navigate. But not only do we, you know, support each other when we have difficult challenges, we celebrate the milestones and the achievements, you know, and the good things that happen along the way. So that's really, you know, kind of what I was thinking. I wanted to just share my story just to help somebody else. And I am honored to be with all of these amazing women on this table talk tonight.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that is that's brave. That is true courage, being willing to share your own sense of success and failure that you talked about in the name of supporting and encouraging others. I just want to recognize that.
Thank you.
Before we move on to other authors, I have a couple more questions for you. You say if you don't have your own BOD, you need to get one. And I know that many of us are on this call thinking, gosh, I want one of those. How? So I would like to ask you, do you have any advice for our attendees that may be thinking about, oh, I need one of these BODs. How did you get yours? How would you suggest us, how do we go about this?
No, that's a great question. And so the women in my personal board of directors, so we've known each other 20 plus years. And we met at a scientific conference, pretty much involved with an organization called NOBICHE, the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. And to be able to present a research paper or a poster at a conference with people that look just like you, and it was such a supportive environment. And not only that, so that's kind of how we met. All of us were attending Big Ten universities, you know, in terms of pursuing our graduate degrees. So I would encourage the audience and people who are going to read this book, when you go to a conference or meet other individuals, you're networking, you can connect, you know, from that standpoint. So that's one of the things that I want to encourage. And I know networking is one of the themes that's throughout the book as well. So that's how I pretty much connect with these young women.
Wonderful. So it sounds like you draw on informal and formal relationships, but it requires kind of an intentionality on your part and thinking through. I really, you know, I'm meeting these people that share similar professional and even personal experiences, and I want to make sure that I keep contact and create this.
Right. But you know, the other thing too, I am not afraid to email anybody. I will email anybody and say, hey, I'm Sabrina, I'm interested in your paper, or I had a chance to, I had the opportunity to listen to your talk. I'm not afraid to do that. And it, creates, that's how you expand your network.
That's wonderful. That's and I think that's a really great advice for some of us that may not have found that courage before, but to hear that other folks are comfortable doing that, I think that's excellent. I think that Pamela wanted to add something. Did you have something to add?
No, but I know that Pamela Scott Johnson always talks about role models and mentors and finding people and giving back. So I didn't know if she wanted to hop in with that one.
Thanks so much, Pamela. In fact, as we go through the book, just as Sabrina talked about connecting and networking, and I know that Shireen will talk about networking. I know that mentorship really does matter. In fact, just as Sabrina talked about connecting with people at research conferences, really think about who your mentors are and who your network is, and those people who can give you advice. These are not always people who have a long-term relationship, but they're willing to give you information that'll make a difference for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Do any of our other panelists want to chime in on having their own personal board of directors or a network that they've relied on in the past before we move on?
Well, I have one, but I'm going to ask the ladies that are the panelists. Would you all serve as my board of directors now?
You're just putting us on the spot, aren't you?
Yes, yes, I am. And thank you for accepting. Thank you so much for accepting that.
Right in front of everybody. I love it.
No, I just, yeah.
So clever.
Practice what you preach, right?
That's right. And attendees, you have a panel of women who have been generous with their wisdom and their knowledge. And I'm certain that they will expect at least a few emails from some of you. So, so please do that for yourself and for all of us, because we all are enriched when we have those connections and share that with each other. Sabrina, before we move on to our next author, I have one other question for you. And I know you have shared some of your wisdom already, but I want to ask if you have any advice that if you were to go back and speak to your younger self, is there anything that you would say to the younger Sabrina that you feel like might be helpful?
That's a great question. That my happiness is my responsibility and not anybody else's. And I think too often we look for happiness in other individuals, the job or the church or that sort of thing. Happiness starts with you and where you are right now. So I would definitely, if I had to go back and tell my 23-year-old self, that's what I would say.
I see everyone's head nodding. I think I just want to say like a collective amen for everyone. I think that resonates with every one of us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to speak with Angela White, and I am going to read just the summary of her chapter so everybody gets a feeling for what she has contributed to this book, and then I will ask her kind of the same set of questions. So Angela's chapter introduces the concepts of critical race theory, permanence of racism, and intersectionality. The chapter sets the tone for the contributions by the various authors. In particular, this chapter speaks to the larger issue of how each impacts the racial and science identities of Black women in STEM at both the secondary and post-secondary educational levels. The chapter examines existing statistical data on women of color in STEM, offers definitions for critical race theory tenets and constructs within the multidimensional inventory of Black identity to address the importance of racial identity. Additionally, the chapter gives a comparison of institutional contexts and their role in developing identities of Black women in STEM. Angela, there is a lot here. I want to ask you, I just want to start because I'm certain that many of our attendees may not have heard this term, that's in the very first sentence. Well, probably there are a couple of things that I'm going to ask you to give us a quick definition for. But first, can we start with this idea of intersectionality? Can you help us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy, for reading the synopsis, and good evening to everyone. I'm glad that you asked for just kind of a quick synopsis of intersectionality, because this notion is really woven throughout the book as well. And so the term was actually coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it is one of the central tenets of critical race theory. And it really sheds light on these dual or multiple oppressions experienced by women of color. So when you begin to think of intersectionality, you have to consider power structures as well as power systems that make certain identities a consequence of a vehicle of vulnerability. For women of color, our experiences cannot just simply be clustered into the experiences of women, because as Black women, there are things that we experience gender-wise that white women do not experience because of the privilege that accompanies being white. Whereas for Black males, we cannot be clustered in terms of our experiences with Black males, because there are unique experiences that we have as Black women. So you begin to look at where these lines actually come together through the lens of intersectionality and those multiple power structures that women of color, and particularly Black women, have to navigate simultaneously. And all of this oppression is what is kind of rounded out in the experiences of Black women.
Thank you for that. I think that really helps clarify the definition of intersectionality, because it's a complex concept.
Right.
Can you help us understand what drew you to write this chapter? What's drawn you to this theory?
So I wrote this chapter along with Dr. Kalisha Petty, who is a faculty member at North Carolina A&T State University, along with Dr. Jessica DeGuire-Gumby, who is at NC State. And when we began to look at just the experiences of undergraduate females, we wanted to learn more about those unique experiences. As Black girls, as Black women who engage in science and technology, engineering, and mathematics, there are these messages that you hear all throughout your educational journey. And that can really have an impact on how you develop a science identity. How do you view yourself in terms of one who does science? It plays an impact on your science performance. And many over the years have really attributed the underperformance of African-American young girls, particularly at the collegiate level, to just a deficiency in their capabilities. And that's not it. There are multiple things that they have to really negotiate at the same time. So we wanted to look more into those unique experiences that play a key role in that. And so through this chapter, we were able to actually leverage the stories and give volume to the voices of multiple Black girls across various historically Black colleges and universities to share their story, which is something that critical race theory does. It gives voice to the people who are typically invisible in a particular realm.
And so important because of that invisibility. So we actually have a question from an audience member that aligns with what you're speaking about. Can you, submitted just a second ago, how do you see women of color in STEM impacting the classroom? What suggestions would you give to educators to increase capacity for young Black and brown women to enter STEM majors?
My advice would be to make the learning experience culturally relevant for Black and brown girls, and also sending constant messages to them concerning their capability. But one of the things that we also have to consider is what is really nestled into the model of science identity that was operationalized by Carlone and Johnson. There are three components to it: recognition, competence, and performance. You have to give acknowledgement to their ability and who they are as science individuals. And oftentimes that's not something that constantly takes place. Instead, they hear messages of you're not able to do science, or when they do face a barrier in their learning, is attributed to a deficiency. So you have to kind of counter that with messages of positivity and showing them images of other Black women, other Black girls who are doing science, who are doing math. That has to be consistent. And then give them opportunities to perform it and match them up with individuals who look like them, essentially. And so having this peer interaction within the classroom that will actually strengthen their capability is something that has to take place on a consistent basis.
Absolutely, and that makes sense. And I do believe we have another panelist that that is going to speak more to the K-12 experience. So perhaps she can elaborate on that in just a moment. Thank you so much. Those three approaches are really practical, actionable items that educators can apply to their classrooms. So thank you for that wisdom. I would also like to ask you the same question that I asked Sabrina a moment ago, and that is, if you could go back and speak to your younger self, what wisdom would you share with yourself?
I would certainly tell myself to not become discouraged by roadblocks, detours, and closed doors, because each of those are rerouting me to experiences that are going to holistically shape me for what I'm ultimately to do down the road. And oftentimes I did encounter just various barriers, and they had the tendency to attack, in some instances, just my confidence or just how I may have seen myself in that moment. So I would share with myself, don't get thrown off when there's a detour or a closed door. It's closed for a reason. There's an alternate experience that you're supposed to go through, so just go through it, and you'll end up where you're supposed to be.
I see many heads nodding. I think we can all relate to that as well. Thank you so much. So we will move on to the next author. And then just for some of you that are typing in questions, I want to let you know we will get to those. Some of these are appropriate for kind of all of our panelists. So the flow of things is that we'll try to go through each of the authors individually, and then we will ask some of these broader questions to the entire panel. So I don't want any of you to think that I'm ignoring your questions. It's just that we're going to get through the authors first, and we may be addressing those to the whole panel. So thank you so much, Angela, for your wisdom. Really appreciate that. We're going to move on to the author of our next chapter. This is Miss Teresa Jackson, and let me read her summary, and then we'll speak with her about her chapter. So chapter 2 examines the impact of segregation at the K-12 level on STEM education and the children in the New York City school system. The chapter gives a historical overview of the effects of Brown versus the Board of Education on the New York City school system in totality, and takes a comprehensive look at the impact segregation educational outcomes have had on African American girls within the New York City school system. This chapter reports STEM achievement gaps for African American girls in K through 12th grade. Recommendations addressing the achievement gaps for African American girls are also shared. Okay, thank you so much, Teresa. I am going to ask you the same question that I've been asking these panelists, and I invite you to share with us what has drawn you to contribute to this book and this work.
So thank you so much for sharing that introduction, and thank you so much for having me. So what led me to want to share and to write this chapter is that I myself am a product of the New York City public school system. And as I grew up and went through the public school system, unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that there weren't many options available for classes within advanced levels of science and mathematics. And upon doing research into the field of policy, I realized that how impactful school segregation is on learning and performance outcomes, particularly in the field of STEM, when students attend certain schools within certain neighborhoods that are predominantly communities of color. It then impacts the number of classes that are offered within the field of STEM. So therefore, I wanted to make this chapter a focus of looking at school segregation and how it influences African American girls, particularly in the field of STEM, and looking at how it influences their learning outcomes and providing recommendations and solutions on how to address this matter. So thank you so much.
Brandy, you're muted.
Thank you. I do that every Zoom call I'm ever on at least once. I apologize, y'all. Teresa, thank you so much for that and such valuable experience that you've been able to draw upon and then share recommendations. So I will pose kind of a version of the same question that I actually just posed to Angela that came from our audience members. And you know, you've touched on offering some recommendations in your chapter. And if you could just give us a quick overview of even just one or two of those that you find particularly helpful or actionable for folks that may be wanting to apply this.
Yeah, so when I began creating recommendations, I wanted to look at a multi-level, multi-tiered recommendation system. So I decided to look at the schools, the school districts, and then looking at when nationwide policies could be instituted. So therefore, on the basic K through 12 level within the school systems, I thought that it would be good to have partnerships created that could have local colleges and universities maybe work in conjunction with schools to develop career days. Therefore, this would not only create visibility, but it also too could show children on a school level how they could learn about STEM and develop that interest. From there, I then looked at on a district-wide level some ways that teacher preparation and some additional training courses could be instituted to help teachers, because one thing that I saw as I was doing my research is that some research found that there were teachers who may or may not have had adequate preparation. So therefore, school districts could work in conjunction to strengthen teacher preparation, as well as working in conjunction with parents and teachers. So therefore, it's a collective impact, and therefore everyone can be on the same level. And then nationwide, looking at test outcomes, because a lot of tests are given to students throughout different states. However, looking at how we can use those test outcomes to really make maybe as a nation, there could be a nationwide policy instituted where students can learn math at a certain level or maybe start certain forms of math earlier in their education career versus maybe at the third grade is when most math is integrated for students, maybe starting to slowly integrate it maybe sooner, but using like it in an incremental way. So those were some recommendations that I had formulated.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So it sounds like a multifaceted, complex approach to a very difficult problem. So
Brandy,
you.
can I ask a quick question?
Please
so,
do.
Teresa, was this you're working on your doctorate, right?
No, I'm actually a graduate student at Teachers College at Columbia University. So I'm looking into doctoral programs right now.
Okay, well, that's good for everybody on this call to know. But the other question is this your research for your graduate?
Yes, so it is. So I come from a background of looking at cognitive science, mind, brain, and behavior, and looking at how we can use cognitive science and neuroscience to inform education policies. So this is the basis of research that I'm just building upon. And not only do I have an interest in looking at the field of STEM, but overall how we can use education, how we can use science, particularly within the field of cognitive science, to inform in overall education policies.
So I wanted to point that out because if anybody is on this call who has an interest in this work and studying this work and think that people will tell you you can't go to school and get a degree doing this work, she's an example of someone who is. So sorry, Brandy, I just wanted to point that out.
Well, I'm so glad you did it. And I invite all of you panelists to kind of jump in here. I am happy to have this conversation kind of multifaceted as well. So that's wonderful. And it's really important point to point out as well. Something that, you know, there's a lot of neuroscience research that tells us about how people learn and what prevents adequate learning. And we have been very slow as a country, as a district, as a school, and often as teachers to incorporate that work in neuroscience. So this is a really important area for examination. Really appreciate it. Teresa, I'm going to ask you the same question, even though I don't know how much younger you know, how much we could get back to your younger self. But in retrospect, thinking back to a younger version of yourself, do you have any advice that you wish you had been privy to when you were younger?
Yes, so I think that this point was touched on earlier, and I think that it's really important to just believe in oneself. I think that as women of color, as we try to navigate spaces or territories that are new, or people who look like us are new to being in those spaces, I think that sometimes people may treat us as though we may be trying to act higher or trying to act above what our intellectual abilities are. So I think that it's important to believe in oneself and know that you have been placed on this path and this journey for a reason, and that it's okay to be different, and that even if someone doesn't accept you, that if it's meant for you to be there and you are meant to be a voice or an advocate, that it is somewhere that you should be. And I think that it's okay to understand that not everyone is going to support you on your journey, and along the way you will find those who will.
Also, such really important words of wisdom. And again, I see every single head nodding of our panelists. I think we all share in those experiences. So thank you for sharing that. We have a comment, and you know, I think that just something to point out. One of our participants has pointed out that the COVID pandemic has led to the closure of schools, and there is a whole nother level of complicating the education of our students. When we have teachers that are not necessarily prepared to teach online, whether or not they were teaching at the level they should be teaching, and that sort of thing. So this is a really, really important topic. So thank you so much for exploring it and contributing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we will move on. Pamela, did you make it back on? We had a difficulty in
No, I don't think she's here.
Connectivity. Okay, so I am going to move on then to Shireen O'Bear, and she has written a chapter on the importance of networking. It's perfect to speak about at this point because we have now talked on the importance of networking and finding people that will encourage you, pretty much everybody that has spoken now. So I think this is a great thing to speak about. So chapter 4 explores the importance of networking for women of color in STEM as it pertains to career advancement. The chapter provides examples of various ways women of color can network to create opportunities that are more than simply leaning in or being more aggressive. In recounting her experiences, the author discusses the importance of networking, effective networking, networking buckets, and building one's own network. Strategies for successful networking are provided. So this is a set of skills that every one of us could stand to enhance and hone, and so critical. So Shireen, can you just share with us what drew you to write about this really important topic?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandy, for moderating this session, and thank you for reading the introduction to that chapter. I think one of the reasons why I was so drawn to talk a little bit about networking is it was probably one of the most challenging yet most rewarding things I found to be part of sort of what makes you versus what breaks you in your career. I remember being a postdoctoral fellow and going to a conference with someone, and that person just happened to be interacting with a particular speaker, and next thing they were having beer together. And I felt because of my race and gender that that was probably not something I could easily do with some of the speakers or some of those who were highly regarded in my particular discipline. So I always found it to be challenging, but I also figured that that was going to be one of the most important things I was going to have to pursue. So as I moved into my academic career as an assistant professor, I remember being told you need to succeed in teaching, research, and service, but nobody really tells you how to succeed in those particular areas. And so it became my mission, you know, to try to understand what is it that makes you successful. And I remember just reading a lot about the importance of networking. But I also never knew what networking really meant. I only knew that, you know, you go to conferences and you hang out and hope, you know, to find someone. And then I remember also being introduced to the laws of reciprocity and trying to really begin to understand, you know, what does that really mean, right? And so reciprocity, you know, is the social norm of responding to positive action with another positive action. And I figured in order for me to be perceived as somebody who has something positive, I need to understand my value. I needed to understand my brand. And I figured I need to understand, you know, what is it that I have to give in order to be able to fit into these networks and to be able to establish relationships with others so that I'm not just seen as somebody who just comes in, but somebody who has value. And so I've always encouraged all my graduate students, all my postdoc, figure out what your value is. You know, sit down, look at your resume, look at all your accomplishments and figure out what that value is. Speak about your value. Tell others about what you have to contribute, because there's always something that you have that somebody else needs. And so when we begin to think of ourselves as people who have value, we can always know that we have something to offer. And so my interactions as I went to conferences began to change. You know, I wasn't asking questions, but I was talking a lot more about my value. Like, these are some of my accomplishments. This is what I do. And as people begin to see that, you know, they begin to think about, well, maybe I can ask this particular person to help in terms of reviewing an article. Maybe I can ask this person to review a proposal, right? Maybe this person needs to be sitting in my panel, right? So you have to really understand what is it that people value and how do you make sure that you're putting those in your buckets. I also, in the chapter, talk about the different buckets that you really need to understand, right? So when I went to my first institution, one of the things that became apparent is I really needed to understand the structure of my organization, right? So a lot of times we feel very isolated in our departments and we don't really know who to go to. But understanding, you know, that hierarchical structure, because I wanted to know who was going to make the decision on my tenure, who was going to be reviewing my files. I started to get to know my dean, started to know my associate dean, started to get to know the research office, you know, who's responsible for where the grants go, what kind of help could I get. And so as you begin to sort of like understand your organizational structure and building those connections, I think it begins to open doors. But again, even with those connections, you need to be able to show your value, right? So even within your own institution, very, very important for people to be able to see the fact that you have something to offer. And so as I began to sort of establish my, you know, I do this thing where I look at my resume every 6 months and I say, what have I done lately? What have I done for me, right? And what can I add there? Or my resume probably talks to me a little bit and says, I'm missing a couple of things. And so, and I always make sure I say that to my students, you know, what have you done for your resume lately? And as you do that, you begin to build that value. And I think it's really important to begin to speak about your value so that people can really see that you are coming in as an asset and not as somebody who's needy.
Such helpful and practical advice that I think all of us can benefit from. I'm actually going to ask you a different version of the question that I've been asking everyone else about their younger self, and this comes from our audience. And they would like to know what advice you would give a junior faculty member on how to navigate the tenure track process and still have a voice.
Yeah, so so navigating the tenure track process is no easy matter. And I think it's important that we all recognize that and understand that. And there are different forces that are working in your favor, but there's a lot of forces that are also working against you. It's very important for you to understand, number one, what does your discipline value? What does your department value? What does your dean value? And what does your university value? That was the first thing that I did when I went to my institution. I remember being in graduate school and everybody talked about, you really need to publish in high impact factor journals. When I started my assistant professor position, that was not valued. All they cared about was the money, right? And so I began to, really focus on, I need to get grants. And by the time I had a certain number of grants, they didn't really care if I had papers or not. So really trying to understand what is the culture of your department, what do they value, and how do you speak to that? But also not neglecting what is valued within your own discipline as well, because you almost have to play this game of trying to fulfill both areas, right? So those are things that are extremely important. Making sure that when you have something good happening, like a good paper got published, or you got a grant, making sure that people who are making these tenure decisions are aware. So one of the things I usually tell my assistant professors right now is, go on Twitter and friend the chancellor. Let them know when a good grant comes out. Let them know, you don't have to necessarily say, hey, chancellor, guess what happened? But you can tweet about it. They want to see success, right? And things that matters to them. So I think trying to figure out what really matters is so critical. Figure out who your friends are and figure out who your enemies are, and try to figure out what are some of the challenges there. Sometimes, one has to also be careful in terms of building networks, because sometimes people will try to take you in the wrong direction. So it's really important to sort of be aware. Where are people trying to direct you? I really like the idea that was shared earlier of having that board of directors, and making sure that you're talking to them about, who is in your department, which ways are they trying to take you. I remember being a young assistant professor, and a comment was made to me that was completely inappropriate, but somebody said to me, I really need you to be a co-PI on this grant because we were dinged in our earliest submission because we didn't demonstrate diversity. I thought that was really inappropriate, and I decided I was not going to be part of that proposal because I have more to give to the work than being, a color. And so it's really important to listen to what people are saying, to really know who your friends are and who they're not, and to just be careful. But it's also important to really find networks outside of your institutions and to maybe collaborate with those individuals. I've established some really great collaborations with people at other institutions where they're people that I trust, people whose work I feel comfortable working with. You don't have to establish these networks within your own institutions or collaborations within your own institutions, but look around the country, figure out where there are good people to work with, and collaborations can continue to happen remotely. So I definitely advise a lot of people to try to do that.
Wonderful. So much actionable advice there. I really appreciate that. Very rich and full response. And I know I want to just address all of our attendees right now. I know we have a lot of questions popping up in our Q&A box, and we will get to as many of those as we can. But I'm going to have to leave a few of those for now and move on to the next author so we can make sure to get through all of the authors. Shireen, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We'll speak now with Pamela Leggett-Robinson, author of the chapter on STEM storytelling and also editor of the book. So Pamela, just checking, making sure you're on.
I'm here.
Excellent.
Okay, love technology.
No worries. It happens to all of us, unfortunately, in this world of Zoom everything. So I'm going to read the introduction to your Chapter 3 employs a STEM autobiography to highlight the familiar and formidable barriers faced by women of color in STEM fields. The chapter reminds readers of the often overlooked or buried feelings of isolation, academic or professional unworthiness, and race-gender bias found in early STEM encounters. The chapter offers the counterspace of storytelling to process feelings of STEM-related trauma, bring meaning to STEM experiences, and celebrate the professional and personal transformations of navigating the STEM landscape. The author compares the celebratory transformation of women of color in STEM to that of a butterfly, moving from one dimension to another and undergoing a deep experience that leads to an entirely new self-capacity and perception. Wow.
Wow.
Tell us how you came to write this chapter.
That's a really good question, Brandy. Life experiences, speaking to young women, speaking to my mentors, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of journal writing, and I know Christine does a lot of journaling. But but a lot of life experiences, and just really understanding that just because you start one place doesn't mean you have to end in that very same place, and being okay with ending someplace else. One of the things about this chapter also is I just love women to have an idea that, or just the hope or understanding that there are things called nonlinear STEM professions. And you can do more with your STEM degree than go into academia, government, or industry. There are so many different things you can do. But sometimes we don't get to that place because we're just burdened down with the STEM trauma that we've been through. And so, like I said, I likened it to a butterfly, and this may be inappropriate, but I don't care. And so I have a tattoo of a butterfly. For that very reason, because I went through a very traumatic experience in my professional career. And I was reminded that there's beauty on the other side. Like, that caterpillar goes through that dark space, right? But comes out so beautiful and can just add life to the environment. And so that's really how I came up with that chapter. And I just like to tell stories, and I like to hear the stories of women because it gives power to other women.
Absolutely, and it really reminds me of some things that our other authors have said. So again, one of these common themes of things turning out different than you expect, and facing that adversity and or failure or shame. We've heard all of these really heavy negative words, and yet we've also all celebrated the beauty that comes out of that and the strength that comes out of that. So really appreciate your willingness to share in those experiences. So I'm going to ask you what I've asked everyone else, and I would love to hear what advice you would give younger Pamela.
Probably not to eat so much chocolate. Seriously, I would probably tell her to enjoy every single moment of the journey. Every single moment. So in retrospect, there are some things that are pretty heavy that have happened. And a lot of times we don't share those stories. But I wouldn't change anything, and I would probably share more of the stories, especially for those folks that are junior, coming through the door. So often, women in senior positions, we talk about the after effect, right? This is how we got here. But I would probably, in retrospect, go back and spend more time with junior faculty. Just a lot more time with junior STEM professionals, and letting them know that, hey, you can be you can be your authentic self, but understanding what that may lead to, right? And it may not be the thing that you thought it was going to be. I would also tell myself not to get caught up in a title, because oftentimes women of color in STEM, especially Black women, let's just be real transparent here, we get caught up in the title because no one before us has obtained that title, and then we get there and we think that's who we are. But we're so much more than just that title. And so if I had to go back and talk to Pamela that was just coming out of Georgia State or wherever, getting her first gig, I'd say, just be you. Don't get caught up in the title, get caught up in your purpose. What is your purpose in getting this degree? What did you set out to do? Because it takes very different forms. And I would really just roll with that. And that's what I would tell my younger self. And I would also tell my younger self, don't get caught up with the gray and the blues. Wear the hot pinks and the reds and royal blues and the oranges. Be your authentic self.
Yes, ma'am. And you know what, before we move on, we actually have a question from an attendee that I feel like is perfectly pertinent for you. So, can you also address mid-career tenure full professors who have neglected things that are important to them because of the hunt for tenure process? How do you now find yourself and work on projects beyond technical that are also important to you, such as seeding the pathway for Black children, women and men in STEM, and working on racial justice and equity in the academy?
Wow, that's a deep question.
And panelists can jump in here as well, but I also know that you have a history of pursuing your purpose and your passion project, so I felt like this would be appropriate.
So as a associate professor, I got to pick some of the projects that I worked on, you know, those NSF grants that I thought were really, really cool. But I was very fortunate and very blessed that I was able to move through a space where I did not always have to do bench science if that's what I didn't want to do. And so when I moved to the place where I could actually do programs, that's really where I found my life's work. But I took a hit with a lot of other things, right? But to answer the question, I think you just, once again, you have to be true to yourself. You just really do. At the end of the day, you have to decide what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And being a consultant now is probably the best job that I could have ever imagined. Like, I thought that being a professor was like the end all, the be all, but being a consultant for Pamela Leggett-Robinson is probably the best thing, because I really choose the organizations that I work with, and I choose the projects. If the projects don't align with my mission and my purpose in life, which is, you know, really building up women of color, Black women in STEM, people of color in STEM, really working on broadening participation for those marginalized groups. If it doesn't align with that, then I just don't do it.
So I had a more lighthearted answer. I thought you were going to say, you know, what things we do. Well, during COVID, we're all home, right? So I found my bike in the basement that I hadn't ridden in 15 years, got it fixed. I got a helmet now, I got gloves, and so I ride my bike. I have a little garden out front with my coleus plants and stuff. When I was a little girl, I used to raise plants and sell them. I started playing the piano. I mean, just because you couldn't go anywhere. So I think that those things are also important. And all the other things you said in the question. At the same time, these kind of light things are also important, and I'm rediscovering them and remembering how much I really enjoy doing them. I don't ride very far on my bike though.
Yeah, but you do ride. I've seen quite a few of your pictures, and yeah, you're right, Christina. I think that time that we spend with family and ourselves and self-care, that's also a big part of just doing pretty much what you need to do to fulfill your purpose.
We want more pictures at the bottom of the list. So easy to put it at the bottom of the list. And then you find,
if I could actually add something, is that, you know, people should, when Pamela talks about your authentic self, your whole self, you know, we spend a lot of time in the workplace, and we spend a lot of time either at the bench or working on projects. In addition to our families, many of us may have spiritual lives, we may have civic lives. All of those things benefit from our professionalism, from the skills and from the commitments we have in the workplace. And being able to share that also broadens the perspective so that you don't put all your eggs in one basket.
So very true. So very true. The different parts of our lives really influence and enrich each other. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we are going to move on to our next author, Nicole Powell. And her chapter is Navigating the STEM Professoriate as a Black Woman, Surviving, but at What Cost? And I'm going to read the summary of her chapter. Chapter 5 discusses definitions of diversity and institutional reporting of diversity gains, as well as addresses the struggles of post-secondary institutions with identifying the appropriate strategies and/or interventions necessary to actively recruit and retain women faculty of color in STEM. The chapter highlights the barriers found in STEM departments within the academy, microaggressions, racial and gender bias, hostile classrooms, and devalued scholarship, the navigation for successful tenure and promotion, and the personal cost of obtaining tenure and promotion. The chapter uses an autoethnographic approach to reflect on the experience of a Black woman in STEM working at both a historical Black university and liberal arts intensive, predominantly white institution. Recommendations for the retention of minority faculty at predominantly white institutions are shared. Thank you so much for this, Nicole. I'm going to ask you, tell me what has drawn you to write this chapter?
Well, thanks, Brandy, for moderating. And I'm just so happy to be a part of this project with all these wonderful women. Some I knew before, and some are, although I don't have a personal board of directors, they've been my sounding board, which we all need. So I really had to think hard about what my story would be, what would I tell, and why. And for a lot of us, people see us. So where I am, I'm the only Black tenured female professor in a STEM discipline. Maybe there's one somewhere else I don't know of in a medical school. But people see us and they don't understand what we go through. They're just like, yay, you made it, you know? And we ourselves are normally afraid to tell our story. So this is the first time that I've ever been with a group actually telling our story and to help somebody else go through, understand that as they go through this, they're not alone. They didn't make it up. And that's the other thing as well. Sometimes when we do say something, we're told that we're being too sensitive, and we feel like we've made it up. You know, they want to let us feel like we've made it up. It's not, it's something, it's a figment of our imagination. And so I wanted to talk about what this has been for me. Okay. Yes, there have been good times, but also I've suffered a lot. The physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, everything that you have to go through as you try to navigate this. And sometimes you're not being able to be your authentic self. And if you can't be yourself, the stress of that, it really is walking into trauma daily. So when I wrote this, it was sort of to help me, because as I've gone through it, at the end, Pamela talked about the butterfly effect. It's different for me. What I do now, I'm not really that interested in bench work anymore. I do social justice work and pipeline work, and trying to ensure that there are mentors and policies that will help women of color, women in general, family-friendly policies. So I've changed that way. But in order for me to, it was a reflection as well to see my journey and why I strongly decided to do certain things versus others at this point. And so that's it. So my aim is to really help people begin in their career, people going through just telling them what happened with me, what I saw, what helped, but also give them ideas of what could help. And also for institutions, some things that they can think of, and to see each of us as a unique person. And there's no one thing that fits all. We are all unique. And that while institutions are talking about, students bringing their authentic self and other people bringing their authentic self, that they need to recognize that we should be able to bring our authentic self as well.
Thank you so much for that, and for bringing up the point that there is a true cost to not living in your authentic self, and it is a deep cost, and I really appreciate that you've addressed that here as well. So I will ask you, Nicole, if you could go back and speak with younger Nicole, what would you tell yourself?
So some of it, my colleagues have said before, but one thing is, like I talk about the cost as we go through, it would be one thing, smell the roses along the way and breathe. Take some time to breathe. That's important. And some of it I'm still learning. So it's not even for my younger self. It's something that I'm challenged with every day. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all that is you. That embodies all the roles that you play, in at work, with your family, all of that. So take care of yourself, because if you don't, it's not worth it. The other thing I would say is to understand yourself, and like Pamela said, your purpose. Define yourself. Don't let somebody else define you. So, and that's important. So stand in your own truth, give your own definition of yourself, so that you can be authentic in the process, and then build your support system. And so I'm going to start working on my board of directors, but I've had wonderful women who have been my sounding board. And sometimes it's the emotional part where I can't believe this happened today. Let's just debrief what happened, just somebody who could understand why something might have affected you in a particular way, to just help you to think through whatever happened.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Such words of wisdom, really. And again, kind of, I hear these themes emerging, and we didn't collaborate to talk about these in advance. So real words of wisdom that span across all of us and all of our experiences. Thank you so much. Okay, we will move on to the author of chapter 6, Dr. Pamela Scott Johnson. I'm going to read the summary of this chapter entitled A Journey Worth Traveling, Mentoring and Role Models Matter. Chapter 6 details the mentoring experiences of a Black woman throughout her STEM journey. A literature review of stereotypical images of scientists and their impact on the knowledge, belief, and expectations of Black females in STEM is discussed. The chapter highlights the importance of mentors, role models, the historically Black colleges and universities, community, and systems of support in preparing Black women for STEM careers. Additionally, the chapter discusses how role models and mentors disrupt the narrative of less than for Black females in STEM and ways in which they provide access to wisdom and survival skills. In recounting her STEM experiences, the author reflects on the role of mentoring played in her life and how she pays it forward. Thank you so much, Pamela. I'm going to ask you, tell us how you came to write this chapter.
Yeah, thank you so much. And as everyone has kind of articulated, it's just been great to be with these women. And I do consider, especially those I've known for a long time, to be part of my board of personal directors. But I was in a conversation with a colleague of mine about her experiences in STEM. The conversation started off really about racism. And the person really was kind of admonishing me because she thought that she was not considered part of a racist kind of a privileged system because as a white woman in STEM, she had experienced so many hardships. And so she was recounting her hardships to me, and about being accosted in the lab and about being marginalized. And while I've had some of those experiences and being marginalized, it occurred to me as she talked about being marginalized as far back as middle school and high school, that I actually didn't have those experiences. My mother taught physics, chemistry, and math. And though it was in a segregated system, I never thought that women couldn't do whatever they wanted to do because my mother was a great role model. My great aunt taught mathematics and was the lead mathematics teacher in the middle school. And this is right as the schools began to desegregate. And so I thought about those experiences of being encouraged by mother through her example and her being a role model, but also through her deliberateness. She made sure we had high-level math, calculus, algebra from elementary school throughout. And as the system was desegregating, trust me, I'm not sure that that was as easy for her to assert herself, especially as I've heard even young educated parents talk about the fights they have with the school system. And then I was privileged enough to go to a Black College of Women. And many of the trailblazers who opened the doors for Black people, but in particular Black women, were my mentors, both men and women. And so it gave me, and I've been really grateful, but I never had the opportunity to really sit down. So, and I want to acknowledge that Pamela Leggett-Robinson is my co-author in this. And so our experiences through families that loved us and cared enough about us and asserted us, that's one component of the mentoring process. But it's also those individuals in schools, very much like what Angela provides and Teresa provides, and all of our colleagues provide to young women to affirm that they not only do they make a difference, but they're smart and they go on. I didn't really learn that being a Black female scientist was a problem until I went to graduate school. But then I had a life to and talk to and really understand how important each of those elements were for me. And so in some ways, it's about acknowledging those assets we do have, particularly when we draw on those assets in times of struggle, confrontation. And then finally, it's about embracing my whole authentic self and not having people assume that I might be first generation, not having come from, two parents or not having come from any support. I say, I beg to differ with you. I have had support, and yet the journey has difficulties in them, but sometimes we actually have to take stock of the assets that we have so that we can draw on them.
Thank you so much for that. And a really important acknowledgement that while we do share so many of these same themes, our experiences are all very different. And I really appreciate that perspective as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. I will ask you too the same question that I've asked everyone else, Pamela. What would you go back and tell the younger Pamela?
Yeah, as assertive as I am, there's a part of me that's really an introvert and shy, and there's always self-doubt. And sometimes, just as I've acknowledged the mentors that I've had, sometimes it's about listening to their voice. More often than not, people want to listen to the naysayers, the person who has criticized, the person who puts you down. And what I would have done is to go back and embrace that bit of encouragement that I received, even in the small or stillness of it. And then I think I would have been a little bit more patient. But yeah, that's what I would have done, is to really find ways to calm that inner voice of self-doubt and lean on others, because many of those folks proved to me that they were supporters.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, we will move on to our last author, Christine Grant, Dr. Christine Grant, on rediscovering our original selves. What did we leave behind and pick up on the journey to success? Let me read the summary of this chapter. Chapter 7 shares the lived experience and reflection of being a Black woman in an academic engineering department. The chapter incorporates sanitized excerpts from the author's journals, providing real-life thoughts during a 30-year STEM journey. The chapter brings to light on the importance of personal journaling for women of color in STEM as a means to rediscover one's original self, reset the roadmap, revitalize the game plan, regain confidence, and restore resilience. The overarching goal of the chapter is to compel the reader to examine their own journey and identify, create, and execute a revitalized plan to fully experience each moment of success while putting the challenging experiences in the proper perspective. Both STEM Success Cycle and STEM Career Box activities are provided to jumpstart personal journaling. So a very important tool. Christine, tell us why you came to write this chapter.
So that's a great question. Thank you, Brandy, for hosting. And thank you, Pamela Leggett-Robinson, for badgering me to write this chapter. So it was interesting because in last fall, Pamela asked me to write a chapter, and I said, well, I don't know if I have time. And then she asked me to review, and I said, no, I don't think I have time. Well, December 1st, last year was my 30-year anniversary at NC State. And so I was gonna have a big party, and I had already picked the song list and everything. And then I said, you know what? I'm gonna take 30 days off. And so in January, I took 30 days off. My husband, who's from Ghana, went to Ghana for 3 weeks. So anyway, I had 30 days off. And the interesting thing is I really started to look at my journey, and I started to pull out these journals. I don't journal as much anymore, but I had journals from 25 plus years ago. And I started reading these journals, and I was sitting in an office. I had a big flip chart, and I started seeing themes. And so I started writing these themes on this chart. And now I have words for them, like microaggression or, imposter syndrome, or I have words for those things. But when I was writing the journal entries, I didn't. And I had actually forgot about some of the really horrific stuff that had happened to me. There were really great mentors and all that other stuff, but there were things that people did and things that people said and the way that people treated me in my own home department that I had forgotten about. And so when I started reading them, it just all came back. And I was trying to figure out, what just happened? What just happened this last 30 years? So I thought about this as my journal and my journey, right? And all of us have had some health challenges, right? So I also went into my health portal, which I didn't realize. I've been in the same practice for 30 years. And I started seeing my journal, my health record, my weight, my blood pressure, just things were ticking up. And I saw all these other things like headaches, unspecified aches, stomach issues, just all this stuff. And when I looked at this thing over 30 years, I thought, wait a minute. So that my next activity is to map the stuff I wrote in my journal onto the medical issues that I had, because I know that they're going to be connected. So anyway, it was during this process that I realized that the things I know now from being involved in a lot of advance and other women of color or gender equity, all this work that we do and we're part of, and all the amazing things that these women are talking about, I could now put my journey into the context of these terms. And so then I called Pamela and I said, I think I want to write a chapter. And so it came from that kind of 30 days of just kind of looking at what had happened. And so I actually started, there were two things I put in there. One is the STEM career box concept, which is what elements did you pick up on your journey to success, and what elements do you need to take out of your career box now? And so I had these elements like, I'm not going to read all of them, but wise counsel from coaches, respect, balance, transitions, wellness, well-being. Those were the positives. And then the negative were stress, frustration, and pent-up hostility, bias, macro and microaggressions, inequitable allocation of resources and opportunities. And there's a whole bunch. So I started thinking about maybe we could craft something where people actually wrote down what are the negative elements in this STEM career box and what are the positive elements. And then the other thing was that I came up with was this concept of a STEM success cycle, where the first thing you have to do is learn the rules, pay your dues, and then making it you. And that whole cycle, I thought that women could look at this thing and say, now, how did I learn the rules? What were and you've heard the women talk about all these things that they had to figure out along the way. And, one of the things is that I was the first African-American woman in the College of Engineering at NC State. And I was the only one out of 300 faculty for 16 years. And so finding somebody that looked like me didn't always look like me in my discipline. And I know one of the questions, I'm going to answer one of the questions I was looking at. Somebody was asking about how to find somebody in your subfield that's really related to you so that you can get the mentoring you need. And I think that you may not find someone in your subfield. You may be the only one. So when I look at the women across here, I've learned so much from them. This is like our third or fourth session together, and I've learned so much from them, and we're not all in the same field. So you can still learn from people in related fields. They don't have to be in your subfield. So that's what caused me to write the chapter, and I'm excited because I got to meet this group of women. Who knew that we would be in the middle of a pandemic after January, right? In February, March. So I'm really glad I took that time, and I'm really glad I had a chance to write this chapter to contribute to this work.
So much, and that's a really important aspect of the journey that we haven't yet really addressed, and that is the self-reflection part, and kind of dealing with your own story. We've talked a lot about mentors and helping others and having others help us, but the self-reflection piece is really an important tool as well. So thank you for sharing that bit of wisdom. I will ask you, you know what I'm going to ask, and that is, what advice do you have for the younger version of Christine?
So I was writing down all of the ones that my colleagues said, and I have to just editorialize because I'm probably the oldest one here, right? So I think that a lot of the things that we're hearing are about feelings and about happiness and about being encouraged. Nobody said, I wish I had gone and told that person off, or I wish. There's not like a thing. It's like this. So for me, it would have been, don't be so mad for so long. Because I had some stuff happen to me that early on in my career with regards to space allocation and inequity in resources and some things that some people did. And eventually some of that got worked out, but it was really, really bad. And there were people who said that I should sue my institution, they said I should leave. And I said, no, I want to get tenure, then I want to get to full professor. And now I'm an associate dean of faculty advancement, where I help people to get tenure. I managed the reappointment, promotion, and tenure process for the whole college of like almost 400 faculty. So the fact that I persevered, now I get to be the one at the table kind of making the decisions. But at the time, I was very angry. And I think that I wouldn't have been so angry for so long. I think that my health journal and my other journals probably would have had looked a little bit different if I hadn't been so angry for so long, because those people weren't even thinking about me anymore. Some of them have even died, but and I'm still angry, right? So what? So that's what I would have told myself. But I love I love what my colleagues said about discovering authentic, original stuff, just all this stuff. It's a theme that unfortunately these are still issues, and that's why we have to have the book, and why we're having these conversations.
Thank you for that. And that reminds me of the Buddhist saying, the anger is like a hot coal, and the longer you hang on to it, the more it burns you. When you drop it, then you're no longer being injured by your own anger. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I also add that I wish I had people to help me to manage not just the anger. The anger was justified, but to manage through a solution to help solve the issue. I wish I had people who could not just say, oh yeah, girl, really? Oh my God, they did that to you. They did this to me. I wish there had been more people with constructive solutions so that maybe I could have resolved some of these things earlier and then not been so angry.
Yeah, anger really festers out of a sense of hopelessness. So absolutely. That's
yes.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much. So I know that we are approaching the end of our time, and I know that many of our attendees have been so patient with us. I want to acknowledge that there are so many questions that we have not and probably will not get the chance to address. I think we'll ask one or two questions and we may go over a few minutes, but I want to acknowledge all of those of us that have to be off this call right at 8 o'clock. And I just want to say that this conversation is not over. So we will continue here for a few minutes, and then Pamela will wrap us up. But also in another sense, this conversation is not over. I know that there's an intention to continue this conversation in other webinars, venues, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to let Pamela address that in just a bit. So I want to thank all of our brilliant authors. And I will go on with a question addressed really to the panel in general, but a couple of you I think can really speak to this. This was a question that was submitted ahead of time, and we may get to just a couple of these. But it is that lab environments can be severely unsupportive for women of color, especially Black women, in STEM, as we are subjected to bullying, microaggressions, neglect, discrimination, being overlooked for positions, exclusion from social circles, and are seen as hostile or incompatible with the lab PI when we try to stand up for ourselves. What advice could you give on navigating a toxic lab environment that we are incapable of leaving? What advice could you give on preventing these situations as we establish ourselves in new labs? This is a painful question to read, and I know many of us identify with the frustration and the trauma of experiences like this. So, so I'd like to ask Christine if you'd like to speak to this, since you're fill up here, and then I'll ask a couple more. That would be really helpful.
I would say that,
Yeah, so
oh, go ahead, Pamela. Go ahead.
yeah, no, so I actually was in a lab where the PI actually wrote a negative evaluation. And the evaluation wasn't about the work that I was doing. The PI actually objected to affirmative action and used it as a platform to talk about his lament on affirmative action. But that I was doing well, but he disagreed with affirmative action. And what I'd like to say is to use some of the strands that have been provided here. One is increase your own network. Look for those organizations where you will find individuals who can affirm the work that you're doing. I love what Shireen said in that when you go to conferences, whether or not people have beer with you, look for what value you can contribute. So the wider your network is, the better for you. Make sure that your work has the level of integrity that you really intend for it to have. And then here's the advice that Pamela and I have given to colleagues where we've been co-mentoring. Do not stay in an environment that's going to harm your health in the long run. It's really not worth it. If the environment is so toxic that you find that you're having health challenges, it's really not worth it. But that network will allow you to move forward. And that network is not just people in the field. There are some mentors and people who can give you advice in your institution or work place of work. But there are also networks that are beyond that scope and that you can use in order to leverage yourself out of that environment. But you are the most important person because you impact those around you. So that would be my, two.
Thank you so much. Shireen or Christine, any of our other panelists, do you have anything to add to that?
I wanted to maybe just add to the fact of, what do you do when you need to kind of move into a new lab environment? I think it's really critical that we just provide a little bit of advice, especially if you're an undergrad or a graduate student sort of going into the field. It's really important to sort of survey that environment that you're about to go into and make sure that it's a welcoming environment. And to ask questions to make sure that whether it's the advisor or the people in the group, a lot of times those other individuals that you're going to be working with on a daily basis can be the toxicity that can lead to these health issues that I think Christine mentioned earlier. So always, sort of survey what is going on, do a climate survey of what's going on, ask questions, find the right people to sort of, ask, like, is this a lab that that is going to be the right environment for me? Look at the history of who has been in the lab, who has graduated, and how long it took them to graduate. There's history sometimes where you see, like the person of color, it took them 10 years to get out of the lab, right? Where somebody else, it took them, maybe 4 or 5 years, right? So it's really important not only to see, like, how long did, like, what is the history? How long did they make it in there? And for those that are sort of like in the faculty roles, don't sit there and tolerate the abuse. I have been in my past, I was an associate dean. And I would sit there and listen to a lot of these stories. And some of the things we were able to do is pick people out of their department and put them in a healthier department. So all of these things are possible. But it's important to be able to understand, the structure of your organization, the environment that you're in, and don't sit there and tolerate it. You only have one life to live, and it's important that you try to be healthy during that process. And I can tell you from experience, staying in an unhealthy environment is toxic to the mind. It's toxic to your ability to succeed. You got to get out of it.
I just have one thing to add. Oh, I'm sorry, Christine. You sure? That's so important, Shireen, what you said. It really is. And that's where I think your board of directors and your your social circle, your professional circle really comes in handy. Sometimes we are so focused on that title and getting that very thing that we throw caution to the wind and we give up every single thing that we said that we wouldn't. And then at the end of the day, when we get tenure or we move up the ranks, we are equally as miserable as we were prior to. And so I think sometimes we have to take a moment to just step back and reevaluate. As Christine said, reevaluate our health. As Sabrina said, reevaluate and talk to our board of directors. In Pamela's chapter, you know, really make sure we are thinking about those mentors and those role models. You know, really just take a moment. And even as Angela said, you know, does this environment really support me at those intersectional levels? Does it support me as a woman? Does it support me as a scientist? Does it support me as a Black woman? Because if those things are all sitting on you, then that's supposed to be.
Thank you so much. Christine, did you have something to add?
Oh, I agree with my colleagues. I think if a toxic situation is not good, everybody has to make their choice. I have a number of friends who have left situations. I decided to stay in mine. It was my choice. I would not advocate for, you got to do what I did because I did it, but it's got to feel right to you. If it's not feeling right, I had enough allies. Okay, I should point that out. I had enough allies and mentors in my locale, in my department, in my college, across the campus that mentored me and coached me and advised me, that made it work, right? So if you don't have that and you're really getting beat up bad, then you should consider leaving. And you'll look back and you'll say, wow, I'm so glad I got out of that situation. But definitely connect with people in your professional societies. Somebody had asked about that. Connect with people in your professional societies. And now that we're all online, there are ways to connect virtually to find mentors or coaches or just advisors as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And I think just to add, just leaving is not a failure. I think sometimes we sort of look at a situation and we're so afraid that if we leave, we're going to be labeled as failures. No, leaving and going to a healthy situation is not a failure. I think it's important for us to just remember that.
So true. So very true.
There's a social context because we use our social environment as cues for determining our worth. And I think what each of us is reminding each other and you in the audience is that your worth is determined by you, but it takes practice. It does take coaching to do that. And a lot of times it took me a long time and talking with my board to really let someone in authority know what was going on with me, who shed a different perspective on it. And that silence is a lot of times where abusive situations, and that's whether or not you try to understand the people who are being toxic. The first thing is to make sure that you are healthy and well.
So very true. There's another question here that I feel like kind of speaks to many of the things that we have touched on. But it's interesting because I don't feel like we've addressed it quite yet, even peripherally. So I do want to bring our attention to this question, and we'll do our best to answer as many of these either in the chat box or in person before we have to leave the call. But I do want to bring our attention to this one, and that is many of the panelists have mentioned focusing on your purpose, your authentic self. Some of you have said, what advice do you have for young professionals who are still trying to determine their purpose? And I will let anybody who feels like jumping in take this one.
I'll take a stab at it. So, you know, what I'm really committed to as an educator and as an administrator is really making sure people understand the gift that they bring to the world. And that purpose isn't always apparent. My father used to say, every ability to do the next one. So don't ever take any experience or job that you have as not having any value. You have to continue to ask yourself, what is my why? I love, I think as Simon Sinek has this great presentation on discovering your why. Look at the strands. I'm going to take a little bit of what Christine said and looking at her journal and recognizing their strands. If you look at those activities for which you've been engaged over a lifetime, there's a common theme in there. Do you want to make the world better? Do you want to bring healing to others around you? But there's a strand in there that's not equated to a title, but to the way and to that which you are grounded in being. It's an ontological conversation, not a doing conversation. And that's when you find out who you are in your still moments, that everything I do is related to this thing. What is it? And you might not come to you overnight or in a couple of years, but continue to think about those common themes that keep occurring in your life and for which you continue to put your energy and effort toward.
Thank you so much, and for acknowledging that it really is kind of an iterative process that takes time. And I acknowledge that several of our panelists and attendees are having to leave. But I do just want to appreciate the richness of this conversation, and just say I personally have benefited so much from the stories and the experiences that you guys have shared. So I want to say thank you so much. I will turn it over to Pamela Leggett-Robinson to wrap up at this point.
I think Angela did you have something?
Oh, yes.
In that last one?
I was just going to add on to what Pamela stated and just really place emphasis on the fact that we have to understand that purpose is not static, but it's always unfolding. And so again, when you take a look at the different things that you have been drawn to, the things that you've done throughout the course of life, those things are ultimately giving you glimmers of what you're to do at different points in time. And so we try to sometimes restrict purpose to like this one major thing, but aspects of our purpose is always revealing itself or unfolding. And so that will help to minimize frustration. And I've learned that even just throughout my journey, because I thought, as Pamela Leggett-Robinson stated, that it was just going to be this linear pathway. But each thing along the way gave me more insight to what purpose held for me in that season. And then I shifted into something else. So I just wanted to just put that piece out there, that it's not static, but it's forever unfolding before us, and we just navigate through that.
That's a huge bit that we often tend to miss, and you're right. I think acknowledging that prevents us from experiencing frustration. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Well, we want to thank all the panelists, and thank you definitely, Brandy, for moderating this lovely evening of engaging conversation. So tomorrow you will receive an email from me thanking you for your attendance. And there's also a survey. It's really quick, about 6 questions. Just want to know if you liked it, if you want to see more, other topics you want us to cover. But that's your call to action. We're in unprecedented times, and this is a great way to have engaging conversation with people that you may not ever get to meet face to face. So utilize this time, utilize us, but please respond to the survey. Also, if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'm going to put this information in the chat, and we will be happy to contact you as well. All the questions that you actually had in the question and answer that we didn't get to, I will take those, and I will also share them with the panelists, and we will send out a and we'll figure out a great platform to do that, because the questions are anonymous on purpose. Okay. One more thing to let you know, in a couple of days, we will send out a link as well for the YouTube channel, and you will be able to look at this again. And if there's further questions that you might have, this just gives you another opportunity. So thank you, ladies, for participating. Thank you, audience. I appreciate everything, and you all have a great evening.
We should thank Pamela too. Pamela.
Oh, thank you.
Our leader.
Thank you, Pamela.
And Pamela, tell us where we can purchase the book, because some folks have asked and we have not yet given out that information.
So the
your libraries as well. I mean, your libraries could purchase it as well.
They can. So the book is sold on IGI Global. If you go to that website, you'll see it, and you'll also get that information on the email tomorrow, or you can go to Amazon and get it. But hint, 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 if you go to IGI Global, they're giving discounts. They're giving discounts. If you go to Amazon, you have to pay the full price. So hint, 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 go to IGI Global. Y'all have a great night, and thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
It's been an honor.
We're still here? We're still here?
Yes, Christine, we're still here. I'm
Oh,
ready to end it
recording.
now.
Sorry.
You know, people are still
Congratulations,
on.
Pamela.
Are you on record?
No, thank you.
This is after the Oprah show.
We're still recording.
We're still
The behind the scenes.
Great
Bloopers.
You want to put the thing in there, Josh?
Great job.
Oh gosh! Wait, somebody has a hand raised. What? That's Chris. Why is he?
That's a high five.
When I answered it, that's a high five. Somebody said thanks, Christine.
Let me see.
It was a high five. I'm so slow. Okay, y'all. Good night. I'll talk to you ladies
You
later.
all have a good evening.
Good job.
All right.